I sold my grandmother's ring to fund his first startup pitch. I remember my hand trembling as I placed the heirloom into the jeweler's palm, hoping it would mean something to him, hoping he'd see the depth of my sacrifice. "We're building a future," he always said, and I clung to that phrase like a promise tattooed on my heart. Love made me generous, blind even. I gave up my own dreams, paused my degree, and took a waitressing job so he could chase his. I thought we were in this together, but only one of us was climbing. He used to say I had a calming energy, that I was his peace. At the time, I thought it was romantic. Looking back, it was just another way to keep me quiet, to keep me from demanding too much, from asking questions. I didn't realize I had become background noise in my own life. I supported him through sleepless nights, nervous breakdowns, failures. When he got his first investor, I cried harder than he did. He kissed my forehead and whispered, "We did it." But I was the we. He was always the me. Our apartment was tiny. I cooked with a single burner, used plastic drawers for closets, and stretched $20 over a week. He called it temporary discomfort for permanent success. So I believed him. I shut down my parents' concerns and reassured them I was happy. I stayed up late editing his proposals, crafting his email pitches while he slept beside me. Sometimes I wondered if he even noticed the bags under my eyes or the ache in my wrists. But love, I told myself, means sacrifice. And I sacrificed everything. He got slicker over time. Suits replaced hoodies. Espresso replaced instant coffee. He'd leave in the morning with a quick kiss and come home distracted, phone glued to his hand. "It's just business," he said. But I could feel the shift. He stopped asking about my day, stopped celebrating little wins. I was no longer his piece. I was his placeholder. But I ignored the signs. I kept the fridge stocked, paid bills on time, smiled when he walked in the door. Because if I let doubt creep in, I was afraid everything I gave up would be for nothing. I overheard the name one night, Emily. He was pacing in the hallway, thinking I was asleep. His voice was low, but not soft. There was laughter, intimacy. He said, "Soon. I promise." My chest tightened, heart thudding like a warning siren. But I didn't confront him that night. Instead, I stared at the ceiling until sunrise, replaying every moment, every lie disguised as love. Maybe I was wrong, I told myself. Maybe Emily was a colleague, a client. Maybe I was paranoid. But the gut doesn't lie. And mine was screaming the truth. I searched his drawer the next day. I hated myself for doing it. Felt dirty, like a thief in my own home. But tucked beneath old receipts and USB drives was a real estate brochure. A luxury condo. 2 bedrooms. Move-in ready. What hit hardest wasn't the property. It was the buyer name listed. Him and her. Emily Sutton. I dropped the paper like it burned. My legs gave out. And I sat there on the floor, shaking, surrounded by everything I had built for us, now evidence of a life he was building with someone else. I confronted him that night. He didn't deny it, just looked at me, blank and unbothered, like I'd inconvenienced him. "I didn't think you'd understand," he said. "Didn't think I'd understand. I gave up everything for this man," and he acted like I was a footnote in his biography. "We've grown apart," he said, as if we'd both slowly drifted, instead of him sailing off while I anchored us. "You've changed," he added. And in that moment, I realized he never intended to take me with him. I was never part of his final draft. I packed slowly, deliberately. No tears, no begging. Just a quiet rage that burned brighter than grief. I took the little I had left, some books, my grandmother's photograph, and my worn laptop. As I zipped the last suitcase, he had the nerve to say, "You'll be okay. You're strong." No apology. No guilt. Just that hollow sympathy people give when they walk over your heart and call it a lesson. But he was right about one thing. I was strong. And he'd just given me a reason to prove it. I disappeared from his world completely, deleted every trace of him, blocked his number, ghosted mutual friends. I moved back in with my sister in a town that smelled like healing. I slept for a week, barely spoke, barely ate. Then one morning, I opened my laptop, stared at a blank document, and started typing. My story poured out like venom. Raw, unfiltered, the heartbreak, the lies, the rise. I wasn't writing to shame him. I was writing to resurrect me. The girl I had abandoned for his dream, I was going back to get her. I enrolled in online business courses, took a job at a local bookstore to pay the bills, started selling handmade journals on Etsy, pouring my story into every design. People responded. Women wrote to me, saying my captions felt like their lives. I wasn't alone, and neither were they. For the first time in years, I wasn't living for someone else's ambition. I was building something with my own two hands. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't fast. But it was mine. And every click, every dollar, every kind review whispered, keep going. The Etsy shop took off slowly at first. A few orders a week. But it wasn't just about income. It was about reclaiming power. Every journal I sent out was like closing a wound, sealing it with purpose. I named them after the things I used to suppress: boundaries, self-worth, unapologetic. It felt poetic, like taking all the pieces he broke and crafting them into something beautiful. My hands no longer served someone else's dream. They were building my own. And with every package I wrapped, I whispered, "You didn't destroy me. You released me." He tried to reach out, of course. A few texts, an email. "I miss your calm," he said. I didn't reply. Not because I didn't feel something, but because I finally knew better. He didn't miss me. He missed the silence, the soft place to land after every storm he created. But I was no longer that woman. I was learning to be loud, to take up space, to love myself loudly and without apology. He had built a world without me in it. Now, I was building a world where he couldn't exist. Then came the article. Startup star Ben Whitaker credits his rise to grit and independence. My name wasn't mentioned. Not once. Years of sacrifice, of staying up editing his decks, cheering through the tears, pushing him when he doubted himself, erased. He had rewritten history, cast himself as the lone hero. I stared at the headline, jaw clenched, heart pounding. But instead of spiraling, I stood up, straightened my spine, and whispered, not this time. He could erase me from his story, but he couldn't erase the truth. And I was about to remind him of it. I didn't seek petty revenge. I sought clarity and exposure. I gathered emails, receipts, drafts I had edited, timelines that didn't add up without me. I contacted a journalist I once served coffee to. She told me to reach out if I ever had a story. I had one now. I laid it all out, not bitter, not vindictive. Just facts. Just proof. She listened quietly, then leaned back and said, "He's about to regret forgetting your name." It wasn't about vengeance. It was about reclaiming the narrative. Finally, my voice would echo where it had once been silenced. The article hit a week later. The woman behind the curtain. The untold story of Ben Whitaker's success. My inbox exploded. Strangers. Supporters. Some critics, too. But I didn't care. For the first time, the world saw the truth. He called me 7 times in one day. I didn't answer. He emailed, asked to talk in person. I declined. Publicly. With grace. "There's nothing more to say," I wrote in response. "You taught me that Silence is powerful. And just like that, I closed the door, not with a bang, but with a whisper he'd never forget. The next week, I was invited to speak at a women's entrepreneurship panel. Me, the girl who once worked 3 jobs so he could chase his startup dream. I walked onto that stage in a blazer I bought with my first full Etsy payout. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't falter. I told the truth, not just about him, but about me. The girl who once begged to be seen. The woman who now commands a room. People cried. They cheered. And for the first time in years, I stood tall without anyone beside me. And I liked it. He tried to discredit me online. Said I was bitter, exaggerating, clinging to the past. But his words fell flat. People had seen the receipts, literally. The screenshots, the photos, the timelines. Truth echoes louder than ego. And mine rang like a bell through every comment thread. I didn't engage. I didn't need to. The world had already decided. He'd built a throne on the backs of others and was shocked when someone stood tall enough to knock it over. I didn't destroy him. He did that when he underestimated the woman he left behind. I started mentoring other women. Girls like me who had poured themselves into someone else's dream and forgotten to water their own. We sat in circles, shared stories, cried, laughed. I watched them go from broken to blooming, and it healed something inside me, too. I realized revenge wasn't the moment the world applauded. It was the quiet nights where I finally slept peacefully. The mornings I woke up excited again. He used to say I was his peace, but I'd become my peace, and no one could take that from me again. One day, I found the old ring. My grandmother's. I tracked it down quietly, saved for it month by month. When I held it again, tears spilled freely. It was like touching a version of myself I'd lost. Innocent, hopeful, wildly in love. But I wasn't bitter. I wasn't angry. I was grateful. That girl had believed in someone. And now, she believed in herself. I slipped the ring on, not as a memory of sacrifice, but as a symbol of return. I hadn't just reclaimed a piece of jewelry. I had reclaimed me. I walked past his office once. Glass walls, busy people, polished everything. He didn't see me, but I saw him, sitting alone, scrolling his phone, faking purpose. I smiled, not out of satisfaction, but peace. There was no more fire in my chest. No ache. Just light. Just freedom. I didn't need revenge anymore. I was the revenge. Not loud. Not messy. Just radiant. He built a future without me. And I built a future so bright he'd need to squint just to glimpse it. I started waking up before my alarm again, not out of anxiety, but purpose. My mornings were slow and intentional. Black coffee, candle lit, soft music playing as I opened my laptop. There was no one to please now. No one to prove myself to. Just me, my work, and the quiet satisfaction of being in charge of my own damn life. It was strange how peace felt so unfamiliar after years of chaos. I used to associate calm with laziness. Now it felt like power. I wasn't chasing anymore. I was choosing. I launched a new product line, journals for women rebuilding after betrayal. Every design carried a piece of my story, my healing. I called the line Phoenix. Orders came in faster than I could handle, and soon I had to hire help. I chose women like me, quiet warriors with fire in their bones. Watching them thrive lit something in me I didn't know was still alive. I wasn't just healing, I was helping others do the same. My pain had a purpose now, and that made it sacred. One night, I was invited to a charity gala for women entrepreneurs. I almost declined. Part of me still felt small, like I didn't belong in rooms like that. But I went. I wore a red dress, bold, unapologetic. I walked in, chin high, and the whispers started. "That's her," someone said. I smiled and took my seat like I belonged, because I did. When I stepped up to speak, I didn't shake. I told my story without flinching. And afterward, people lined up not for autographs, but to say, "Thank you. You made me brave." He was there. I didn't expect it, but there he was across the room. Gray suit, forced smile. He saw me and froze. For a second, it looked like he didn't recognize me. Maybe he didn't. I had changed. The girl who once begged for crumbs had turned into a woman who feasted at her own table. I didn't walk over. I didn't need to. My presence was louder than anything I could have said. And that, I realized, was the sweetest justice of all. He approached me later, asked if we could talk. I nodded, not because I owed him anything, but because I was no longer afraid. We stepped out onto the terrace. He looked tired, like life had finally caught up with his ego. "You look different," he said. I smiled. "I am." He apologized, said he didn't realize how much I did for him until it was gone. Typical. I didn't say much, just nodded, letting the silence sit between us like glass. He finally whispered, "I miss the old US." I said gently, "She doesn't exist anymore." After that night, I didn't hear from him again. And I didn't need to. The story was closed. I had written my final chapter, signed it with grace, and shelved it where it belonged. In the past. I wasn't his ghost anymore. I wasn't anyone's shadow. I was the sun now, rising on her own terms. And the warmth I felt each day came from within. That's the thing about healing. It doesn't always roar. Sometimes it arrives in whispers that say, "You're home now." My story went viral, not because I chased attention, but because it was real, raw, relatable. Women from all over the world reached out, some in tears, others in awe. They said my journey gave them permission to start over, to choose themselves, to believe that life after betrayal wasn't just possible, it could be beautiful. That meant more than any paycheck or headline. That was legacy, not built on bitterness, but on truth. I had turned my heartbreak into a map, and women were following it back to themselves. My sister threw me a birthday party that year. First time I celebrated in forever. There were fairy lights in the backyard, old friends, music, cake. Laughter bubbled up so easily now. Joy wasn't something I had to chase anymore. It came to me. I stood under those lights, surrounded by people who truly saw me, and thought, this is what love looks like. Not sacrifice, not silence, but presence, kindness, choice. I didn't need a partner to feel full. I had become whole all on my own. I took a solo trip to Italy, sat in quiet cafes, journaled beside lakes, watched the sun set over unfamiliar streets. No itinerary, no one to answer to, just me and the life I was choosing every single day. I didn't think about him. Not once. That was the miracle. The freedom wasn't just physical, it was emotional. I wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. I was just being. And in that space, I found the kind of peace I used to beg for. The kind I never knew was possible. Eventually, I went back to school, finished my degree, sat in the front row this time, asked questions, raised my hand without fear. My professors saw me, respected me, and I saw myself, too, with clarity, pride, and a touch of wonder. The girl who once traded her dreams for someone else's now walked hallways with purpose. I wasn't behind. I was exactly where I was meant to be. And the diploma? It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was proof that even shattered women can rebuild, stronger, smarter, unstoppable. Graduation day came with a soft drizzle. I stood in my cap and gown, soaked but smiling, surrounded by classmates decades younger. yet they looked at me like an equal. Some even came up to say they admired my resilience. One girl whispered, "I heard your story. You give me hope." I blinked back tears. That had once been me, young, unsure, pouring into someone else's future because I didn't believe I had one of my own. Now I stood in the rain, a degree in hand, proud and whole, knowing this moment was mine alone. I opened a brick-and-mortar store that fall, named it Rooted. It was everything I'd imagined. Warm lights, shelves lined with journals and candles, spaces for workshops. The grand opening felt like a wedding. Only better. It wasn't about uniting with someone else. It was about finally choosing me. Women came in droves. Some cried when they entered, saying they felt safe there. That meant more than revenue. I'd created sanctuary out of my scars, a temple built on truth. And every brick whispered, "You are not alone." He walked into Rooted one day. I wasn't surprised. Word spreads. He looked around, tried to smile. "It's beautiful," he said, "just like you always imagined." I nodded, not offering more. Silence had become my most powerful tool. He looked like he wanted to say something else, but didn't. I think he knew this wasn't his place anymore. He had wandered into a world he didn't help build. And as he left, I didn't feel anger. Just clarity. He was part of my past, but he would never touch my future. I framed an old photo I had once hidden, me in a tiny apartment, hunched over a laptop, dark circles under my eyes, hands red from washing dishes at midnight after editing his pitch deck. It hung behind the counter, a reminder, not of suffering, but of strength. People often asked who the girl was. I'd smile and say, "That's the woman who made this all possible." And I meant it. Every late night, every tear, every betrayal had become part of my foundation. I didn't erase the struggle. I honored it. I dated again, slowly, cautiously. I didn't look for saviors. I wasn't waiting for someone to complete me. I wanted connection, not codependency. The first man I really liked asked me what I was most proud of. I didn't say the shop or the story. I said, the day I chose myself and didn't look back. He smiled like he understood. Maybe he did. But even if he didn't, it didn't change a thing. My worth was no longer tied to being chosen. I had already chosen me, and that was enough. My mother visited the shop one afternoon. She walked slowly, fingers brushing across the spines of journals, eyes misting. "You did this," she said. I nodded. She looked at me with something deeper than pride, recognition. "I stayed in a marriage for 30 years because I didn't believe I could do this," she whispered. "But you changed our story." I hadn't realized until then how far the ripples reached. My healing wasn't just mine. It became a lifeline for others. I wasn't just rebuilding. I was breaking generational chains. I started writing a book, not about him, but about the journey, about finding yourself after being lost in someone else's story. I called it Second, when, after my own rebirth, the pages bled with truth, both tender and sharp. I didn't hold back. I wrote about the nights I cried on kitchen floors, and the mornings I rose anyway. I wrote for the women still stuck, still doubting, still quiet. And when I finished the last sentence, I didn't feel drained. I felt free, like I'd set something down I'd been carrying for years. The book hit shelves 6 months later. It didn't make any bestseller lists, but the letters poured in. Handwritten notes, DMs, emails from women I'd never met who said it saved them. One woman wrote, "You reminded me I'm allowed to start over." That was everything. Awards were nice. Impact was better. I didn't need validation from headlines. I had found it in stories shared under dim lights and tea-stained pages. In that quiet exchange of truth between two broken souls trying to heal. One evening, I stood outside rooted, locking up. The street was quiet, the air cool. A woman stood across the road, just watching. I recognized that look, half awe, half disbelief. She finally crossed over and said, "I left him. Last night. I read your book, and I just knew it was time." I held her hands. "It's scary," I said. She nodded, tears falling. "But it's freedom," I added. And in that moment, we weren't strangers. We were sisters in survival. Proof that healing is contagious. That truth, once spoken, can save lives. I got a tattoo to mark the journey. A single word etched over my ribcage. Rise. It hurt, but it felt right. Every time I saw it in the mirror, I remembered the nights I almost gave up, and the mornings I didn't. It wasn't about him anymore. It never really was. It was always about me and who I became in the aftermath. Strong, soft, brave. I didn't just survive his betrayal. I transcended it. I didn't just rebuild. I rose. I was invited to speak at a university conference. Women who rebuilt. I stood at the podium, looking out at rows of young faces. Some eager, some tired, all listening. I shared my story, not as a victim, but as a woman who clawed her way back to herself. When I finished, there was a pause, then applause, slow, then thunderous. Afterward, a student hugged me and said, "You made me believe I don't have to disappear for someone else's dream." That was the moment I knew I'd become the woman I once needed. A year passed. My life was full of good work, deep friendships, long walks, honest laughter. I no longer measured my days by productivity or someone else's validation. I measured them by peace. Mornings started with gratitude, not dread. Nights ended in quiet, not chaos. I no longer flinched when someone said, "love," or "forever." I knew now that forever starts inside. And love. Real love doesn't demand your silence. It honors your voice. I was finally learning how to love without losing myself. He sent a message. Just one. "I read your book." That was it. I stared at the screen, emotionless. There was no need to reply. I'd already said everything I ever needed to, in the pages he'd flipped through too late. And that was the beauty of it. I didn't need revenge anymore. My healing had spoken for me. He had to sit with the truth of who I'd become, not as his ex, but as a woman who was never his to begin with. He lost me long before I left. A podcast asked to interview me. They titled the episode, "Reborn from the Ruins." I smiled when I heard it. That was exactly what I was. Not a survivor of heartbreak, but a creator of something stronger. I told the host that heartbreak doesn't break you. It breaks the illusion. It shows you who you really are. And if you're lucky, if you're brave, you rise. The host teared up, said my story gave her courage. That's when I realized I wasn't just healing. I was leading. I launched a mentorship program, Rise with Me. 10 women joined the first round. Different backgrounds. Same pain. We met weekly. We cried. We screamed. We journaled. We laughed. One woman said, "You gave us more than advice. You gave us ourselves." That line stuck with me, because that was the truth of it all. I hadn't offered solutions. I'd created space for grief, for rage, for rebirth. And in that space, women began to bloom. Not perfectly, but powerfully, just like I had. My father, who had never understood why I left, finally visited my shop. He looked around quietly, eyes glassy. "I didn't know you were this strong," he said. I smiled. Neither did I. We sat for an hour, sipping tea. He apologized for doubting me. I didn't need the apology, but I accepted it, because we both needed closure. We both needed to move on from old stories. That day, I realized healing isn't always about you. Sometimes, it's the light that shows others how to find their way out of the dark. I got a letter from his new partner. Handwritten. Honest. She thanked me. Said my story helped her see the signs before it was too late. She left him. She chose herself. I sat with that letter for a long time. Not out of bitterness, but awe. The ripple effect of truth is endless. My story hadn't just saved me. It had become a lifeline for women I'd never even meet. And that, I realized, is the quiet power of rising. You become a lighthouse without even trying. There was a reunion, college friends I hadn't seen in years. I almost didn't go, but I showed up, head held high. Some didn't recognize me at first. Others just stared. "You're glowing," one said. I smiled. That's what peace looks like. I wasn't there to impress anyone. I was there to honor the girl I used to be. The one who once sat at those tables, full of fear and people-pleasing. That girl was gone now. In her place stood a woman who owed no one an explanation. That winter, I took a cabin trip alone. No phone, no internet, just firewood, books, and snow. I wrote in my journal, "You made it." The silence was soft, not lonely. I cooked for myself, danced in socks, watched the stars. I used to need chaos to feel alive. Now peace was enough. The woods whispered nothing and everything, and I listened. My rebirth didn't come from a grand moment. It came in the quiet, the steady, the choosing, over and over again, to rise, to heal, to live. I visited my childhood home one last time. It was smaller than I remembered. I walked through each room, touching walls like old friends. I found an old photo of me at 13, wide-eyed, dreaming, already a little broken. I pressed it to my heart. "We made it," I whispered. I wasn't trying to fix the past anymore. I was honoring it, letting it go. And as I walked out the door, I didn't look back. Some stories aren't meant to be rewritten, just remembered, and then released. I launched the second branch of Rooted in a neighboring city. It was bigger, brighter, and full of life. Opening day, a woman walked in carrying her daughter's hand. She asked me where strong women go. "I brought her here," she said. I knelt and looked the little girl in the eyes. "You already are one," I told her. And that was the legacy I was leaving, not just a store, not just a story, but a belief planted in the hearts of women everywhere. Your power is real. Your voice matters. My book was picked up by a small publishing house overseas. I traveled to speak in cities I'd never dreamed of visiting. One night in a quiet hotel room in Florence, I stood on the balcony overlooking the Arno, a glass of wine in hand, the city humming below. I whispered a quiet thank you to the heartbreak, to the betrayal, to the fire that nearly consumed me. Because without it, I never would have flown this high. Pain had been the price, but freedom was the reward. A documentary team reached out. They wanted to tell my story. I hesitated. Sharing on my own terms was one thing. Being documented, raw, and unfiltered was another. But I agreed, because maybe one more woman needed to see this, to hear not just the pain, but the aftermath. Not just the collapse, but the rise. When the final cut played, I cried. Not because it hurt, but because it was beautiful. I had become someone I could be proud of. Not perfect, but whole. Unapologetically whole. I met someone new, unexpected, gentle, unafraid of my past, curious about my future. He didn't try to fix me. He stood beside me. He listened. He let me be. And when he said, "I love you," it didn't feel like a demand. It felt like an offering. I didn't lose myself in him. I found another part of me. And for the first time, Love felt like freedom, not sacrifice. We moved slow, with respect, with laughter, and I knew, whatever happened, I'd never abandon myself again. I returned to the place where I first caught him cheating. The hotel. Same hallway. Same scent in the air. But I wasn't trembling this time. I was still. I took a breath and walked past the door where my life had cracked open. I didn't stop, didn't pause, because I didn't need to relive it. I had rewritten it. The girl who once fell apart here, she no longer existed. In her place stood a woman with her own story, her own light, her own peace, and that was enough. Years later, a young woman interviewed me for her thesis. She asked, "What's the one thing you wish someone told you back then?" I thought for a long moment and said that your worth is not measured by how much you give away. She blinked, stunned. "That's going in the paper," she smiled. And I knew then the wisdom I bled for would live on, not just in books or speeches, but in quiet conversations like this. My pain had become a compass for those still finding their direction. One morning, I woke to find a handwritten letter slipped under my shop door. No name, just, "Your story saved me. Thank you for being brave first." I sat with that note in my hands, the sunrise pouring gold across the wood floors, and I thought about all the versions of me who never thought she'd make it here. I wanted to gather them all, hold them tight, and whisper, "You did it. You made it through. And now you get to rest." That morning, I did. I was invited to light the community holiday tree that year. As the lights flickered on, casting soft glow over bundled children and tired mothers, I felt tears sting my eyes. It wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about belonging. This community had held me when I was shattered, and now I was giving back. One little girl tugged on my coat and said, "You're the lady with the strong heart." I laughed. "Something like that," I said. But inside, I thought, "Yes, baby, that's exactly who I am." The final chapter of my second book ended with a simple sentence. I stopped asking why it happened and started celebrating that it did. That was my truth. The betrayal wasn't the end. It was the door. And through it, I walked into a life far bigger than I had ever dared to imagine. I had become more than I'd lost. The pain didn't define me. The rebirth did. And now, every time I share my story, I do it for the girl who stayed too long, and the woman who finally walked away. So here I am now, no longer angry, no longer aching, just alive, fully, fiercely alive. I no longer fear starting over. I honor it. I no longer look for validation. I am it. This is not a story of heartbreak. It's a story of becoming, of rising from ashes, not just with scars, but with wings. And to any woman still standing in the ruins, you are not broken. You are not behind. You are on the brink of your second when. And that, my love, is where everything begins.